Drytrons, the most complex tier 1/tier 2 deck on the ladder. I'm gonna break this down into a step-by-step strategy that'll be really easy for you to understand, and it'll give you some complexity within the combos and some versatility, so just in case you don't open ideally, you still have a play to make. All right, so first and foremost, I know a lot of you have wanted to learn how to play Drytrons if you've never played it in the TCG and OCG, and coming into Master Duel, this can be incredibly complicated. So here, I'm gonna give you the 3 main rules to live by when it comes to Drytron. Rule number 1, defense before offense. You wanna make sure you play defensively, so your opening play should always be defense before it is offense. Rule number 2, always prioritize Cyber Angel Benten. Cyber Angel Benten is your fuel for this engine, so anytime you have a chance to pull a monster, make sure it is Benten, because Benten will always give you a +1 with Drytrons. Rule number 3, don't forget your graveyard. Drytrons have the same activation in hand as they do in the graveyard. So it doesn't matter if you don't have any Drytrons in your hand and they're all in the grave, they still can activate and special summon from the grave. Please don't forget how important that is. So now that we got the main rules out of the way, let's talk about the ideal way to play it. And the ideal way to play this is with 2 cards. We're talking about Alpha and Zeta. Think of it as A to Z. Alpha will give you a +1 ritual monster. Zeta will give you a +1 ritual spell. So ideally, you want to start with Alpha. Alpha tributes off Zeta, and your +1 will be Benten. Now with Zeta in the graveyard, you want to use the Benten in your hand, tribute summon to bring Zeta to the field. When Zeta's effect activates, you want to grab a Meteonis Drytron. This will allow you to ritual summon any ritual monster by just tributing off 1 Drytron monster, and I'm going to talk about that in the second step. I also like Meteonis because it can add itself back to the hand by decreasing any of your Drytron monsters by 1,000 attack. Benten will give you another +1. You can either go Benten depending on what's in your hand, or you can start the initial combo and go Herald of Perfection. Now, you have options. You can go into Herald of Ultimateness as well, but it is an ultra rare, so just in case you don't pull it, you can use Perfection as your super rare. Ultimateness is ideally the better card, but for all intents and purposes, we're gonna be using Perfection here to show you that this deck still works with Perfection. The second step, with Alpha and Zeta on the field, you want to Xyz summon into a Fafnir. Now when Mu Beta Fafnir is summoned, ideally, you want to send a Gamma to the graveyard because Gamma is going to fuel the engine for your next turn. Fafnir allows you to just discard one of its materials for a ritual summon when you use Meteonis. Then you want to activate Meteonis to ritual summon Herald of Perfection or Ultimateness. So your starting field will be a Fafnir plus a defense Herald of Perfection. This still leaves cards in your hand, and ideally, you probably will have a Diviner of the Herald in your hand. You want to normal summon Diviner of the Herald and send Eva. Eva gets sent to the graveyard. It will ask you to banish 2 fairy monsters to give you a +2. You can banish a Benten, and you can banish the Herald that's on the field. Your +2 will then grab a Herald of Orange Light and another Diviner. Why are you grabbing those 2? Simple, you need to have fuel for your Herald of Perfection or your Herald of Ultimateness. In order for you to negate anything that your opponent does on the field, it needs fuel of fairy monsters. This is the perfect negate. If your opponent breathes, negate. If your opponent blinks, negate. If they think about coughing, negate. That is the idea that you want to have. You want to frustrate your opponent to the point where anything that they do, you've negated all 3 options or their first 2 options, and all they can do is set pass or just pass it off to you. Now, you know what you're thinking. In a perfect world, I'll always have Alpha and Zeta in my hand, but most of the time, I don't have those combos. Don't worry, I'm going to give you 3 combo options because I know, take it from me, you don't always open perfectly. So, combo number 1. We're gonna call this one the pre-preparation to perfection via Benten. If you have no Drytrons in your hand, but you have a lot of spells and maybe some ritual monsters, hopefully a Benten, you might have a pre-preparation of rites in your starting 5. Pre-preparation of rites will give you a +2. It'll give you a Dawn of the Herald plus a Herald of Perfection. With a pre-prep, you can use Ben-10 to then summon your Perfection, and then Ben-10 will give you a +1. You can give yourself any fairy monster as a +1. I normally go Diviner because Diviner can give you a +1 by banishing Eva, but you can grab a Herald of Orange Light depending on what's in your starting hand. Combo number 2 is the one we spoke about. Move Beta Fafnir into Perfection. Now, it doesn't mean you necessarily have to start with Alpha or Zeta. You may end up starting with a Gamma and an Alpha. You may end up starting with a Gamma and a Delta. However it is, you still have an option to play this hand. Usually if you're opening that way, you're probably opening with Cyber Emergency, or you're opening with Drytron Nova, which are all +1 Drytron cards. So even though we're playing 10 Drytron monsters, we're playing an additional 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 additional cards to help you pull Drytrons. So it's 18 Drytron cards out of a 40 card deck. Your opening hand will always have the option. I usually see a Cyber Emergency or a Nova in the hand, so it'll give me the option to do an Alpha play or to do a Zeta play. Cyber Emergency is a much better card since it doesn't just throw it on the field and not activate its effect. So I opted in for more Cyber Emergencies because it just made more sense. Cyber Emergency will give you a +1 of any of the cards that you're missing. So if you're missing Alpha, Cyber Emergency, grab Alpha. Combo number 3. Spells into Drytron into Perfection. If you open Cyber Emergencies, if you open Drytron Novas, even if you open a Fafnir, you can have some +1s on the field here. It's a great way to again add some cards to your hand or even bait out your opponent with some plays. Since you're getting a lot of +1s, you can go Cyber Emergency, grab yourself an Alpha or a Zeta to the field. You can go Drytron Nova, grab yourself something to the field. Just so you know, you still want to use these engines to still pull Ben-10. Remember rule number 2, always prioritize Ben-10. On your second turn, that's when you can start activating your Drytrons in the grave, swarm the field, and from there you can summon things like Access Code Talker. You can summon things like Herald of Mirage Lights, which is just another negate spells or traps by discarding fairies. You can go into Cerebus, which then targets a special summon monster in your opponent's monster zone. Very important to remember, it has to be in the monster zone. Or you can go into Nightmare Phoenix, you can discard a card and target a spell or trap and then destroy it. Or if you're lucky, you get a Nightmare Unicorn and you can target any card in the field and shuffle it back into the deck. All those are great plays. Now, every so often you may see plays of people going Diviner, discarding Herald of the Arclight, turns Diviner into a level 6, and if you have another level 6 on the field like Cyber Angel Ben-10 or Perfection, you go into Beatrice and you do that engine, and from there you can attack in because Beatrice is 2500 attack. We threw it max Cs because we want to make sure we stop our opponent from making any plays. Most of the opponents, when they see that we're playing Drytrons, they know about the Perfection play, they know about the negate. If they see a maxi toss into the graveyard, they usually stop because they don't want to have you draw cards and potentially draw into more negates. Now, there were a lot of versions that used E to 10, but we opted to use Natasha for one reason only. When Natasha is in the graveyard, if your opponent attacks into you, can banish Natasha and another Cyber Angel Ben-10 and take control of their monster, so you got control from the graveyard. The last part of this deck is just some easy negate monster effects. So we've got Call by the Grave, we've got Forbidden Droplet, which also halves your opponent's monster, and we also have Infinite Impermanence, which you can activate from the hand if you've got no cards on the field. All 3 of these, you can switch them out for an Ash Blossom if you like. There are your base combos. Take a look at the replays. You're going to see a lot of versatile gameplay, but now that we've explained how the combos work, you get to see them in action versus many different decks. Enjoy this deck, have some fun, and I hope this has been helpful.